In front of me is a Ford 1.6 CVH. This was originally the standard engine that I had inside my 8240 XP, but when it came time to rebuild it, because I had to rebuild it, what had happened is this hose, it's a crankcase vent or crankcase pressure equalizer hose. It's supposed to allow the crankcase to vent with the valve cover, so then you don't have overpressurization down below. And what had happened is apparently that had been plugged full of carbon. So then when I went for a 2-hour drive one day, the crankcase had overpressurized and blew out a rear main seal, and then blew out the head gasket on the back. And between me blowing the oil seal of the head gasket, the oil passage of the head gasket, and then the previous owner had the head put back on for some reason. At some point, the timing belt had snapped because there's a couple valve indentations in the pistons, but otherwise the pistons are fine. So someone had replaced the head. The head was never skimmed flat, so it had a little bit of arc on the mating surface. So that didn't help matters either. But when it came time to rebuild it, I thought, you know what, I have all the high output parts. I'll just make this, on paper, the high output model. So I did. I put on the high output headers, the 4-1 tubular steel headers. And then I put on the, here's where it gets a little tricky. I put on the 1.9 carbureted intake manifold. Its runner ports are a little bit bigger than what this one had, so I'm not sure if that's the same as the high output 1.6 or not, because I believe the high output intake manifold is the same as this. It's just for 81 and 82 the port sizes were really small. 83 they got opened up a little bit better. Same with the head. This had a 81, 82 head on it. It still has another 81, 82 head on it, but I had ported the inside so it would match my intake manifold, and then I gave it a decent valve job. What I failed to do when I was porting was I totally forgot to blend the seats. So that's probably what's holding me back at this point. Next rebuild, I'll do that. And then I just yesterday put on the high output carburetor. So the standard one is 32. So both the primary and secondary barrels are 32 millimeters at the bottom. But the actual Venturi choke size is only like a 23 and 24 or something like that. Anyhow, the high output one is a 32-34. So when you open up the secondary, you get a slight performance boost. And as long as that secondary isn't opened, you're still making the same economy you would otherwise. So it makes for a great combination. Oh, and this engine, I put in the high output cam. So that's the one with 0.240 inches at the lobe versus 0.220 inches at the lobe. So after you do the 1.6 rocker ratio conversion to that, the difference is some. it's some. It's enough to mention. But otherwise, I had been running it with all the high output everything except the carb. So just the normal carb, high output everything else. And off the line, it had good power. It had real good power just off idle. But then, $2,000 to $4,000 was about the same as the normal car was. But when I switched to the high output carb, now I have decent power all the way from idle all the way up to about 3 $3 grand, 3,500, and then at 3,500, this thing takes off like a rocket. So I'm not quite sure if that's from me porting the intake side of the heads and then using the 1.9 manifold in conjunction with the headers, or if that's everything all together, or if that's strictly the carb. But I don't think it's just the carb. The carb alone isn't doing all that magic. But so the question is it worth it to turn your base model into the high output model? Well, I definitely think so. To put headers alone on your otherwise stock 1.6 is sadly a total waste of time and money. These headers could be better. They're not all that great. You can see right there, they strategically pinch that one so that you can still get at the manifold bolts. And then all the twists and bends, they're not very well flowing, but it is a big step forward from the normal cast manifold. Sadly, like I said, you won't notice any difference whatsoever unless you have the other high output parts to match. Same can be said with the cam. Switching to the high output cam will make you no difference. However, what it does do is, because its timing is about the same, it's pretty much just lift that's taller. But what that means is that your cam will last longer. These flat tapped camshafts have a tendency to wear out lobes fast, especially on the I believe the intake valve of the fourth cylinder, or the exhaust valve of the third cylinder. One of the two has a tendency to wear out its lobe prematurely, a lot sooner than all the others. But like I said, if you have the high output cam, that cam will last you a little bit longer, because as the cam wears down, you in theory lose performance. While if it takes your cam about twice as long to wear down, well then you have not more performance, but you have that same performance just longer, which is a big benefit, or at least it is in my mind. So then, what else is there? Well, there's the carb. You have everything except the carb. The carb will be what's holding you back. And if you have the carb but nothing else, it's your everything else holding you back. Like I said, when I had the normal carb on here, let's step back. So before my rebuild, the engine was completely stock. It had some power from idle up to 3-4 grand, but you wouldn't get anything past 4 grand. It eventually gets up to 4 grand. It's real smooth and predictable that way. But come 4 grand, it's time to shift, whether you like it or not. That's the end game. I rebuilt the engine, 1.9 intake manifold, ported the intake side, valve job, and then headers, and now, and high output cam. And now after all of that, it has smooth, predictable power from idle all the way up to, again, 4 grand, but it does have a little bit more. Now, yesterday, I put the high output carb on. The sucker's flying. We're making a noticeably more power from idle all the way up to 3.5 grand, and like I said, from 3.5 down up, it's a total rocket. It will rev well past 5,500 now. Whether or not I want to do that, we'll see. These supposedly are safe up until 6,500. That's about the time you have valve float. But otherwise, if it weren't for that, apparently you can rev these up, to 9K. That's great. The next engine I build will be something to that extent. It'll be blueprinted and built so that it can rev past 7. That would be fantastic. So, otherwise, all in all, economy before rebuild was about 35 or 30-ish. I should say 30 to 35. After my rebuild, it was pretty consistent at 35. What was killing me was I'd spend so much time just idling in the driveway, me checking over things, make sure that everything's still good and carbs still working as still adjusted as it should, because the idle mix will vary after you have a rebuild. But now I don't know what I'm getting for fuel economy now that I have the high output carb on, but was getting 30-35 again, and that's with me driving a little bit more mad. And it's a lot easier to do now. It's hard to resist it because it is much more fun this way. Someday I might try out a 32, 36 Weber. I don't think I'll ever try a 38, 38. Yeah, your performance would be through the roof, but the fuel economy would suffer bad because the 38, 38 is synchronous, not progressive. That's what makes these great. Whenever you see a 32 followed by like a 32 or a 34 or 36, that's progressive. So the more you put on the throttle, the more you get in return, which means you're not hard on the gas, you're saving it. So is it worth it? Yes. Yeah, if you have all the parts, and I mean all the parts to make it the high output motor, go for it. Totally worth it. On paper it says you only get 10 more horsepower, but it doesn't say where. Let me tell you that 10 more horsepower is from well, almost from the start. You know, you can notice it right off idle and all the way up, and then from $3,000 up, it's just drastic. But I'll write down in the description all the differences between each of the motors so you make a fair decision.